Hey guys, tonight we begin with something very relatable. Friendship, or more accurately, a beautiful story about a bond that stood the test of time, the kind of connection we all hope to find in our own lives. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So there was this dog, right? A golden retriever named Bailey. Beautiful dog, golden fur that shimmered in the sunlight, big brown eyes that just melted your heart. Bailey lived with this family, the Hendersons, in a house right by the lake. And I mean right by the lake. Their backyard literally opened up to this gorgeous, peaceful lake surrounded by trees and cattails and all that. Natural beauty. Bailey was about 3 years old when our story starts. Still young and playful, but not quite a puppy anymore. He'd grown into himself, had that mature dog energy, but still loved to play fetch and chase squirrels and do all the things dogs love to do. The Hendersons had 2 kids, Emma and Jake, and Bailey was completely devoted to them. Wherever they went, Bailey wasn't far behind now every morning. Bailey had this routine. Mrs. Henderson would let him out into the backyard around 6 in the morning. And Bailey would do his business, sniff around the yard, check the perimeter like dogs do, making sure everything was secure. Then he'd wander down to the dock that stretched out into the lake. The Hendersons had this nice wooden dock, probably about 20 feet long, with a little bench at the end where you could sit and watch the sunrise, and Bailey loved that spot. He'd sit there on the dock, front paws hanging over the edge, just watching the water. Sometimes he'd see fish jumping, sometimes a turtle would poke its head up, and pretty regularly, he'd see ducks. Lots of ducks. Mallards mostly, with those bright green heads on the males and the speckled brown females. They'd paddle by, quacking and diving for breakfast, completely ignoring Bailey. Bailey had never really paid much attention to the ducks before. I mean, they were there, they were part of the lake scenery, but they weren't particularly interesting to him. They could fly, he couldn't. They spent all their time in the water, he didn't. Different worlds, But then one morning in early spring, everything changed. Bailey was doing his usual morning routine, sitting on the dock when he heard this sound. It wasn't the normal duck quacking he was used to. It was more like distressed peeping, high-pitched, urgent, scared. Bailey's ears perked up immediately. He stood up, tail wagging slowly, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. He looked left, looked right, and then he saw it. Down by the edge of the dock, where the wood met the water, there was this tiny duckling. And I mean tiny. Couldn't have been more than a few days old. This little ball of yellow fluff with an orange beak, and it was peeping its heart out. Clearly in distress, Bailey carefully walked to the edge of the dock and lay down, bringing his face close to the water to get a better look. The duckling was paddling frantically but seemed stuck somehow. As Bailey looked closer, he could see that one of the duckling's tiny feet was tangled in some fishing line that was wrapped around one of the dock posts. The poor little thing was exhausted from struggling, and Bailey could tell it was scared. Its little chest was heaving, its peeps were getting weaker, and it kept trying to pull away, but the line wouldn't give. Now, Bailey wasn't sure what to do. He wasn't afraid of water. He'd been swimming in the lake plenty of times, but this seemed like a delicate situation. He couldn't just jump in. He might scare the duckling even more or make things worse. So Bailey did what any good dog would do. He started barking. Loud, insistent barks directed back at the house. Mrs. Henderson heard him almost immediately. "Bailey, what's wrong, boy?" She came out onto the deck in her bathrobe and slippers. "What are you barking at?" Bailey barked again and looked down at the water, then back at her, then back at the water. Mrs. Henderson got the message and walked down to the dock. "What did you find, Bailey?" When she saw the duckling, her hand went to her heart. "Oh, no, you poor little thing." She knelt down next to Bailey. "Bailey, good boy for finding this." "Good boy." She carefully reached down, spoke softly to the duckling to try to calm it, and worked on untangling the fishing line from its foot. It took a few minutes of careful work, but finally the duckling was free. Mrs. Henderson lifted it gently out of the water, checking to make sure its foot wasn't injured. The duckling was shivering and peeping softly now, a different sound than before. Less panicked, more confused, Bailey stood next to Mrs. Henderson, watching intently. He sniffed gently at the duckling, and something interesting happened. The duckling stopped peeping. It looked at Bailey with these tiny dark eyes and tilted its little head to the side. "Well, would you look at that?" Mrs. Henderson said softly. "I think this little one likes you, Bailey." She looked around the lake, trying to see if there was a mother duck nearby, but there was nothing. No adult ducks in sight, no other ducklings. Oh dear. This little one must have gotten separated from its family. She stood up, still holding the duckling. "Come on, Bailey. Let's get this baby warmed up and figure out what to do." Bailey followed Mrs. Henderson into the house, his tail wagging with interest. This was definitely the most exciting thing that had happened in a while. Mrs. Henderson set up a cardboard box in the laundry room with some old towels, a heat lamp, and a shallow dish of water. She called the local wildlife rescue center, but they were completely overwhelmed with baby animals this time of year and couldn't take the duckling for at least a few days. "Looks like we're going to be duckling parents for a little while," Mrs. Henderson told her family at breakfast. Emma and Jake were thrilled. Bailey was fascinated. He sat outside the laundry room. Watching the box intently dot, Mrs. Henderson did some research and found out what to feed the duckling. Special waterfowl starter feed from the farm supply store, which Mr. Henderson went to get right away. The duckling needed to eat frequently, every couple of hours, and Mrs. Henderson took on the responsibility like a champ. What surprised everyone was Bailey's reaction. He was completely obsessed with the duckling. He wouldn't leave the laundry room. He'd lie down right next to the box, watching the little yellow fluff ball constantly. When the duckling peeped, Bailey's ears would perk up. When Mrs. Henderson came to feed it, Bailey would stand up, tail wagging like he wanted to help somehow. "I've never seen him like this," Mr. Henderson said, watching Bailey through the doorway. "He's completely taken with that duckling." After a couple of days, when the duckling seemed stronger and healthier, Mrs. Henderson decided it was okay to let them interact more directly, under supervision, of course. She sat on the laundry room floor with the duckling in her lap and let Bailey come closer. Bailey approached slowly, carefully, like he understood this was a fragile creature. He sniffed the duckling gently, and the duckling, instead of being scared, started peeping excitedly. It actually waddled right up to Bailey's nose and pecked at it softly. Like a little kiss, Bailey's tail started wagging so hard his whole back end was shaking. And from that moment on, those two were inseparable. Mrs. Henderson started letting the duckling out of the box for longer periods. Always supervised, and the duckling would follow Bailey around like Bailey was its mother. And Bailey, this big golden retriever, would walk super slowly and carefully, constantly looking back to make sure the duckling was keeping up. When the duckling would get tired, it would peep, and Bailey would lie down so the duckling can nestle up against his fur. Emma named the duckling Waddles because of the adorable way it walked. That characteristic duck waddle that was even more pronounced when it was trying to keep up with Bailey's long legs. As the days went by, Waddles grew stronger and bigger, though still tiny compared to Bailey. The family decided that since they lived right on the lake and had the perfect environment, And since the wildlife center was still overwhelmed, they'd continue to care for Waddles and eventually release it back to the wild when it was old enough to survive on its own. But here's the thing about raising a duckling around a dog. Waddles didn't think it was a duck. Waddles thought it was a dog. It wanted to do everything Bailey did. When Bailey would eat his kibble, Waddles would try to eat kibble too, though Mrs. Henderson had to keep giving it proper duckling food. When Bailey would drink from his water bowl, Waddles would try to climb into the water bowl, which actually worked out fine because ducks need water to dunk their heads in. The funniest thing was when Bailey would go outside to do his business. Waddles would toddle right behind him, and while Bailey was sniffing around finding the perfect spot, Waddles would be right there, waddling through the grass, peeping away like it was having a conversation with Bailey. Bailey seemed to understand that Waddles needed protection. When the family cat, Mittens, would come sniffing around with a little too much interest in the duckling, Bailey would position himself between them and give a low, warning growl. Mittens learned pretty quickly that Waddles was off dash limits at night. Waddles still slept in the laundry room in its box, but Bailey would sleep right next to the box. The family could hear them sometimes, Waddles making soft peeping sounds and Bailey making these gentle whining sounds back, like they were having a conversation. It was the sweetest thing. As weeks passed, Waddles grew. The yellow fluff started being replaced by actual feathers. They could tell Waddles was a female, a hen, based on her coloring and the way her feathers were coming in. She was going to be a beautiful mallard duck when she was fully grown. Her wings started to develop, getting longer and stronger. Mrs. Henderson started taking Waddles down to the lake for swimming lessons. At first, Waddles was hesitant. She'd spent so much time with Bailey on land that the lake seemed intimidating. But Bailey had an idea. Well, dogs don't really have ideas in the human sense, but Bailey did something that changed everything. One warm afternoon, Bailey just walked right into the lake. Not running and splashing like he usually did when he went swimming, but slowly and deliberately, walking into the shallow water near the shore. He looked back at Waddles, who was standing on the shore peeping nervously. Bailey waded in until the water was up to his chest. Then he turned around and looked at Waddles. He barked once, an encouraging sound. Waddles peeped back, sounding uncertain. Bailey took a few steps toward shore, then back out again, showing Waddles it was safe. And then something amazing happened. Waddles took a tentative step into the water, then another, and then as soon as the water was deep enough, her instincts kicked in. She started paddling, natural as anything, her little feet working underwater, her body gliding across the surface. She let out an excited quack, her first real quack, not a peep anymore. Bailey paddled next to her, his big golden body moving through the water with strong strokes. And Waddles stayed right next to him, matching his speed, quacking happily. They swam together, back and forth along the shore, Bailey always staying in the shallow area where Waddles felt comfortable. From that day on, swimming became their favorite activity. Every day, multiple times a day, they'd go swimming together. The Hendersons would watch from the deck, amazed at this unlikely friendship. Mr. Henderson took dozens of photos and videos. Emma and Jake would sometimes join them in the water, and Waddles learned to be comfortable around the whole family. But Bailey was clearly her favorite. As summer came and Waddles got bigger, she started trying to fly. At first, it was just little hops with her wings flapping. She'd run across the yard, flapping madly, and maybe get a few inches off the ground before landing again. Bailey would run next to her, barking excitedly, like he was cheering her on. The first time Waddles actually achieved flight, truly flew, was a momentous occasion. She ran across the yard, flapping her wings, and suddenly she was airborne, really airborne, flying about 15 feet before landing in the lake with a splash. Bailey was so excited he ran in circles barking, then jumped into the lake to swim to her. But here's what was interesting. Waddles could fly now. She had the ability to leave, to find other ducks, to live a normal duck life. But she didn't want to. She'd fly around the lake, practicing her skills, getting stronger and more confident in the air, but she always came back to the Hendersons' yard. Always came back to Bailey. The Hendersons discussed whether they should try harder to encourage Waddles to join the wild ducks that lived on the lake. There were several flocks that would paddle by throughout the day, but every time wild ducks came near, Waddles showed no interest in joining them. She'd watch them from a distance, sometimes quack at them, but when they swam away, she'd stay behind with Bailey. "I think we need to accept that Waddles has chosen her family," Mrs. Henderson said one evening as they watched Bailey and Waddles sitting together on the dock, watching the sunset. "And Bailey has accepted her as part of his family too. So Waddles became a permanent member of the household. They registered her with the state wildlife agency, got the proper permits for keeping a wild duck, and made sure everything was legal. They built her a proper duck house near the water, though she rarely used it, preferring to sleep on a dog bed in the laundry room, with Bailey on his bed right next to her. Life settled into a routine. Mornings, Bailey and Waddles would go down to the dock together. Bailey would sit and watch the lake, and Waddles would swim around, diving for breakfast, sometimes flying short distances across the water. But she always stayed close to their yard, always within sight of Bailey. During the day, they'd nap together in the yard. Bailey would lie in his favorite sunny spot, and Waddles would tuck herself up against his belly, preening her feathers while Bailey dozed. Sometimes neighborhood kids would walk by and stop to stare at the dog and duck sleeping together. It became a local curiosity. The Hendersons' house became known as the place with the dog and duck. Emma and Jake loved it. They'd tell their friends at school about Bailey and Waddles, and soon kids were asking to come over to see them. The Hendersons didn't mind. They'd have small groups of children over, teaching them about wildlife, about kindness to animals, about the importance of helping creatures in need. Bailey and Waddles became local celebrities in a way, but the real magic was in the quiet moments, the everyday interactions between Bailey and Waddles that showed just how deep their bond had grown. Like the time Bailey got sick with an upset stomach. He was lying on his bed, clearly not feeling well, whimpering softly. Waddles stayed right next to him all day. She didn't go swimming, didn't go outside except when necessary. She just sat next to Bailey, occasionally preening his fur gently with her bill, making soft quacking sounds like she was trying to comfort him. When Bailey finally felt better the next day, Waddles quacked excitedly and did a little flying circle around the yard in celebration, or the time a big storm rolled through, with thunder and lightning that scared both of them. Bailey was never great with thunderstorms. He'd hide under the dining room table, trembling. That night, Waddles waddled under the table with him and tucked herself against his side. They rode out the storm together, both scared, but less scared because they had each other as fall approached. The Hendersons wondered what would happen when winter came. Would Waddles want to migrate south like ducks normally do? Would some instinct kick in and make her leave? They read everything they could about mallard ducks, about their migration patterns and behaviors. Some mallard ducks do migrate south for winter, but many stay in northern areas as long as there's open water and food available. The lake the Hendersons lived on rarely froze completely because it was fed by a spring that kept at least part of it open all winter. And the Hendersons made sure Waddles had plenty of food. When the first real cold snap came in November, they watched Waddles carefully. A large flock of ducks gathered on the lake, and the Hendersons thought this might be it. This might be when Waddles joined them and flew south. Waddles flew out to the flock, circled around them, landed on the water near them. The Hendersons held their breath. Bailey stood on the dock, watching intently, whimpering softly. Emma had tears in her eyes, thinking Waddles was saying goodbye. But after about 10 minutes of swimming with the wild flock, Waddles took off, flew back to the dock, and landed right next to Bailey. She quacked once, as if to say, "Nope, I'm staying here," and that was that. The wild flock left the next day, heading south, but Waddles stayed. That winter was magical in its own way. When it snowed, Bailey and Waddles would play in it together. Bailey would bound through the snowdrifts, and Waddles would waddle after him, sometimes using her wings to hop over the deeper snow. They'd return to the house covered in snow, and Mrs. Henderson would towel them both off. Laughing at the sight of them, Waddles learned to love the cozy indoor life during the coldest parts of winter. She'd sit with the family while they watched movies, tucked up on Bailey's dog bed next to the fireplace. Bailey seemed proud to share his space with her. Sometimes Waddles would preen Bailey's ears, which would make Bailey's tail thump contentedly against the floor. The lake did partially freeze that winter, but there was always a section of open water where the spring fed in. Waddles would swim there, and Bailey would stand on the shore watching her, sometimes venturing onto the ice to get closer, but always careful not to go too far out. Waddles seemed to understand that Bailey couldn't follow her onto the thin ice, so she'd swim in the open water close to shore so they could still be near each other. Spring came again, and with it, new baby ducklings on the lake. Mother ducks leading their little flotillas of fluffy babies around the water. Waddles was fascinated. She'd fly out to look at the ducklings, but she never tried to interfere with them. It was like she was remembering her own babyhood, maybe, or just curious about these creatures that looked like she once did. Bailey seemed less interested in the other ducklings. He'd already raised his duckling, thank you very much. Waddles was his duck, and these other ducklings were, well, they were fine, but they weren't WADDL stat as the years passed, because, yes, this friendship lasted for years. Bailey and Waddles grew older together. Bailey's muzzle started to show gray. He slowed down a bit, wasn't quite as energetic as he used to be, but he was still devoted to his daily routines with Waddles. Waddles remained healthy and strong, as ducks tend to be pretty hardy. One thing that changed as they got older was that Bailey needed Waddles just as much as Waddles needed Bailey. When Bailey developed a bit of arthritis in his back legs, making it harder for him to get around, Waddles seemed to sense it. She'd slow down her waddling to match his slower pace. When Bailey would lie down to rest more frequently, Waddles would stay right there with him, keeping him company. The Hendersons watched this friendship evolve over time, amazed at how these two animals from completely different species had formed such a deep bond. They'd seen Bailey with other dogs, and he was friendly enough, but it wasn't the same. And when other ducks came around, Waddles might acknowledge them, but she had no interest in spending time with them. Bailey and Waddles had chosen each other, and that choice remained constant. Emma and Jake grew up with Bailey and Waddles as constants in their lives. Emma went off to college, Jake entered high school, but whenever they came home, there were Bailey and Waddles, still best friends, still inseparable. It gave the family a sense of continuity, of something steady and pure in a world that kept changing. One summer, when Emma was home from college, she brought her boyfriend, Derek, to meet the family. Derek was a city kid, not used to rural life or animals much beyond dogs and cats. When Emma told him about Bailey and Waddles, he nodded politely but clearly thought she was exaggerating the relationship. The first morning of his visit, Emma took him out to the deck for coffee. "Just watch," she said, pointing toward the dock, right on schedule. Bailey came out of the dog door, Waddles waddling behind him. They walked together down to the dock, Bailey's tail wagging, Waddles quacking softly. When they reached the end of the dock, Bailey lay down and Waddles nestled up against him. They sat there together, watching the morning sun sparkle on the water dot after a few minutes. Waddles stood up, stretched her wings, and flew out over the lake. She did a few loops, gaining altitude, showing off her flying skills. Derek watched, impressed. But then he saw what happened next. Waddles flew back and landed right next to Bailey. She quacked at him, and Bailey stood up. Together, they walked to the edge of the dock, and Bailey carefully stepped down into the water. Waddles was already swimming, and they swam together, side by side. Bailey's golden body and Waddles' brown and white feathers, creating a beautiful contrast on the blue water. Derek's mouth was literally hanging open. "I've never seen anything like this," he said quietly. "Nobody has," Emma replied, smiling. "That's what makes it so special." Derek ended up taking hours of video of Bailey and Waddles during his visit. He posted some of it online with Emma's permission, and it went viral. Suddenly, people from all over were commenting, sharing, expressing amazement at this unlikely friendship. News outlets reached out wanting to do stories. The Hendersons were overwhelmed. They agreed to do one interview with a local news station, figuring that would satisfy the curiosity and then things would calm down. But the story got picked up nationally. The dog and duck who became best friends was featured on morning shows, in newspapers, on websites. Bailey and Waddles were famous. The family was careful to protect their privacy and the animals' well-being. They didn't want a circus atmosphere, didn't want strangers showing up at their house disturbing Bailey and Waddles. But they did appreciate that their story was bringing joy to people around the world. In a time when the news was often depressing, Bailey and Waddles reminded people that friendship and kindness could transcend all boundaries. Reached out asking if the Hendersons would do presentations about Bailey and Waddles. Mrs. Henderson, who had always loved teaching, thought this was a wonderful idea. She created a presentation about the friendship, weaving in lessons about wildlife conservation, kindness to animals, and the importance of helping creatures in need. She'd bring Bailey and Waddles to schools, and kids would be absolutely mesmerized how Bailey, always great with children, was patient and gentle during these visits. Waddles seemed to enjoy the attention too, though she made it clear she was Bailey's duck and everyone else was secondary. The kids would ask hundreds of questions. Does Waddles think she's a dog? Does Bailey think he's a duck? How do they talk to each other? What's their favorite thing to do together? Mrs. Henderson would answer as best she could, always emphasizing that Bailey and Waddles had taught the family so much about openness, about not judging others based on their differences, about the capacity for love that exists in all creatures. One little girl asked a question that stuck with everyone. Do you think Bailey knows Waddles is a duck? Or does he just think she's a funny-looking dog? Mrs. Henderson thought about it. You know what? I think Bailey knows exactly what Waddles is. And I think that's what makes their friendship so special. They're not the same, and they don't try to be the same. Bailey is a dog, Waddles is a duck, and they love each other anyway. Maybe that's the lesson they're teaching us. The little girl nodded seriously, like this made perfect sense to her, and maybe it did. Kids often understand these things better than adults taught as Bailey got older, reaching his 8th year, then his 9th. The family started to think about something they didn't want to think about. Dogs don't live forever. Golden retrievers typically live 10 to 12 years. Eventually, they would have to say goodbye to Bailey. What would happen to Waddles then? They tried not to dwell on it, but it was there in the back of their minds. Waddles was only about 5 years old. Ducks can live 15 to 20 years in captivity with proper care. She potentially had a lot of life ahead of her. Would she be okay without Bailey? Would she finally join the wild ducks? Or would she be lost, grieving for her best friend? But they still had time, and they tried to focus on the present, on the joy that Bailey and Waddles brought to each day. Bailey's 10th birthday was a celebration. The Hendersons threw him a party, invited some neighbors and their dogs, made a dog-friendly cake. Waddles, of course, was right there in the middle of everything. When Bailey ate his birthday cake, Waddles tried to steal a piece, which made everyone laugh. Bailey, generous soul that he was, let her have it. That night, after all the guests had gone home, the family sat out on the deck. Bailey was lying on his bed, tired from all the excitement. Waddles was nestled against him, her head tucked under her wing. The lake was peaceful, reflecting the stars. It was perfect. "We're so lucky," Mrs. Henderson said softly, "to have witnessed this, to have been part of this." Mr. Henderson put his arm around her. "They've taught us a lot." Jake, now preparing for college himself, said, "I'm going to tell my kids about Bailey and Waddles someday, about how two animals that should have had nothing in common became the best of friends." Emma, visiting for the weekend, added, "It's changed how I see the world. If a dog and a duck can be best friends, then really, anyone can get along with anyone if they're willing to try." They sat there in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the lake, the occasional sleepy quack from Waddles, Bailey's gentle snoring. These were the moments that mattered, they realized. Not the viral videos or the news stories, but these quiet moments of connection and love. As fall approached and Bailey turned 11, he started slowing down more noticeably. He still went through his daily routines with Waddles, still went down to the dock every morning, still swam with her, but he moved more stiffly, needed more rest. The vet said his arthritis was progressing, which was normal for his age, and they adjusted his medication to keep him comfortable. Waddles seemed to sense that Bailey needed extra care. She stayed closer to him, didn't fly as far or as often. When Bailey would have trouble standing up after lying down for a while, Waddles would quack at him encouragingly, like she was cheering him on. It was heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time. One October afternoon, unseasonably warm and sunny, Bailey and Waddles did their usual routine. Morning dock visit, a swim in the lake, a nap in the sunny yard, another swim in the afternoon. Bailey seemed to have more energy than he'd had in weeks. He actually played a little fetch with Jake, which he hadn't done in months. Waddles flew around excitedly, quacking, happy to see Bailey being more like his old self. That evening, Bailey ate a good dinner, had some treats, and settled onto his bed in the living room. Waddles was right there with him, as always. The family watched a movie together, and Bailey dozed through it, occasionally thumping his tail when someone petted him at bedtime. Mrs. Henderson made sure Bailey was comfortable, gave him his medication, refreshed his water. Waddles was already tucked against Bailey's side. "Good night, you two," Mrs. Henderson said softly. "Sweet dreams." In the morning, when Mrs. Henderson came downstairs to let Bailey out for his morning routine, she found him still on his bed. He had passed away peacefully in his sleep, Waddles still beside him. The grief that filled the house that day was profound. Bailey had been more than a pet. He'd been a member of the family, a friend, a constant loving presence for 11 years. The family held each other and cried, sharing memories, looking at photos, trying to process the loss, but they also worried about Waddles. How do you explain death to a duck? How do you help her understand that her best friend was gone? Waddles stayed on Bailey's bed for hours after they discovered he'd passed. She wouldn't leave. She'd quack softly, nudge Bailey with her bill, trying to wake him up. It was heartbreaking to watch. Eventually, the family had to gently move her so they could prepare Bailey's body. They were going to bury him in the yard, under his favorite tree. Maple barked again and ran toward the fox, positioning herself between the fox and the ducks. Waddles looked up, saw the fox, and quacked loudly, flying up and away. Puddle followed. The fox faced with a large barking dog. decided the ducks weren't worth the trouble, and ran off into the woods. Mrs. Henderson's heart was pounding. If Maple hadn't been there, if she hadn't been paying attention, they could have lost one of the ducks. She praised Maple, gave her treats, called the family to tell them what had happened. Maple had protected her duck family, just like Bailey had protected Waddles all those years ago. That incident bonded them even more tightly. Waddles seemed to understand that Maple had saved them, and from that day on, she was even more affectionate with the dog. She'd follow Maple around more, would quack if Maple got too far away, would preen Maple's fur every evening dot as Maple matured into her first year. Then her second year, the routines established themselves. Morning duck visits, all three of them. Swimming sessions, all three of them. Afternoon naps in the sunny yard, all three of them. The Hendersons had become known as that family with the dog and the ducks in their community, and people would drive by slowly, hoping to catch a glimpse of the unlikely trio. The family was cautious about social media this time around. They'd learned from the Bailey and Waddles experience that too much attention could be overwhelming. They shared photos with friends and family, but they tried to keep things more private. Still, word spread. A documentary filmmaker reached out, wanting to make a short film about the family and their animals. After much discussion, they agreed, thinking it could be a nice way to honor Bailey's memory and share the ongoing story. The filmmakers spent a week with them, capturing footage of Maple, Waddles, and Puddle going through their daily routines. He interviewed the family about Bailey, about how this all started, about what they learned from these unusual friendships. The resulting documentary was beautiful and touching. It premiered at a small film festival and won an award for Best Short Documentary. More importantly, it sparked conversations about animals, about friendship, about the ways love transcends boundaries we think are fixed. Schools requested copies to show students. Animal rescues used it in their educational programs. It gave the Henderson family a sense that Bailey's legacy was living on, that the love he'd shown, Waddles had created ripples that were still spreading. Emma graduated from college and moved back home to start her career. She'd become a veterinarian, inspired in large part by growing up with Bailey and Waddles. Her first job was at the local animal hospital, and she loved telling her clients about her family's unusual pets. Sometimes people wouldn't believe her until she showed them pictures. Jake was in college now, studying environmental science. He'd written his college application essay about Bailey and Waddles, about what they taught him about coexistence and mutual care. He called home regularly, always asking about Maple, Waddles, and Puddle. As Maple reached her third birthday, something interesting happened. Waddles and Darwin got back together for another nesting season. Waddles laid another clutch of eggs, and this time, Maple was fascinated by the whole process. She'd lie near the nest, not too close, but close enough to keep watch. She seemed to understand that Waddles was doing something important and needed protection. When the eggs hatched, 7 more ducklings, Maple was incredibly gentle with them. She'd let them climb on her, would lie very still so she wouldn't accidentally hurt them. Waddles trusted Maple completely with her babies, which was remarkable. Here was a dog, a predator species, being trusted as a guardian by a mother duck. It was Bailey's legacy manifesting in a new generation. Puddle, now mature herself, also nested that spring, with a mate she'd found among the local ducks. Her nest was near Waddles' nest, and the two families often swam together. 14 ducklings in total, following 2 mother ducks, with Maple swimming slowly behind them, all like some kind of golden-furred sheepdog of the lake. This time, none of the ducklings stayed. They all grew up and moved on to live independent duck lives, which was probably healthier. The family was a little relieved, honestly. As much as they loved Waddles and Puddle, they weren't sure they could handle a whole flock of pet ducks. Life continued in its rhythms. Seasons changed. Mabel grew into a beautiful, mature dog, calm and steady like Bailey had been. Waddles was getting older now, 7 years old, moving into middle age for a duck. Puddle was thriving in the prime of her life. The three of them were still inseparable. The Hendersons started a blog, at Emma's suggestion, documenting their life with the dog and ducks. Not for fame or attention, but as a record. A journal of sorts. Mrs. Henderson wrote posts about the daily adventures, the funny moments, the touching moments. She wrote about Bailey, keeping his memory alive. She wrote about what they'd learned about patience, about kindness, about the unexpected ways love shows up in life. The blog developed a small but devoted following. People from around the world would comment, sharing their own stories of unusual animal friendships. A woman in Australia had a cat and a parrot who were best friends. A man in England had a horse and a goat. A family in Japan had a dog and a monkey. It became a community of people who understood that animals are capable of so much more than we often give them credit for. Readers suggested they write a children's book about Bailey and Waddles. Mrs. Henderson loved the idea. She worked with a local illustrator, and together they created a beautiful picture book telling the story of how Bailey saved Waddles and how they became best friends. The book ended with Bailey's death and Waddles' grief, but also with hope, showing Waddles with her ducklings and with Maple, showing that love continues even after loss. The book was published by a small press and did surprisingly well. Libraries bought it. Schools used it in their classrooms. Children wrote letters to the Hendersons, some sharing their own pet stories, some asking questions about ducks and dogs, some just wanting to say that the book made them cry, but in a good way. The family donated the proceeds from the book to animal rescues and wildlife rehabilitation centers. It felt right, like they were paying forward the love Bailey and Waddles had brought into their lives. As Maple turned 5 years old, still relatively young for a golden retriever. The family marveled at how much their lives had been shaped by that morning 10 years ago when Bailey had found a duckling tangled in fishing line. One small act of rescue had led to a decade of love, learning, and unexpected friendship. They've learned to pay attention to the small moments, to the quiet acts of kindness that happen between animals. They've learned that family can take many forms. They've learned that love doesn't require similarity. It just requires openness and care. Waddles was slowing down a bit now, not swimming as far, taking longer naps. But she was still healthy, still engaged with life. She still preened Maple's ears every evening. She still quacked good morning to the family every day. She still sat on the dock in Bailey's spot, looking out over the water. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, the whole family would sit out on the deck together. Maple would be lying on her bed, Waddles and Puddle tucked up against her warm sides. The lake would be peaceful, reflecting the sunset colors. And in those moments, they could feel Bailey's presence. Like he was there with them, proud of Waddles, proud of Maple, proud of the family for continuing to love and care for these animals. Emma would sometimes talk to Bailey's grave when she was home. She'd tell him about vet school, about the animals she'd helped, about how he'd inspired her career. "You were a very good boy, Bailey," she'd say. "The best boy. And Waddles is doing great. She misses you. We all miss you. But you'd be happy to see her now, with her ducks and with Maple. You started something beautiful." One autumn evening, unseasonably warm like that last day of Bailey's life had been, the family was sitting on the deck. Maple was 9 years old now, graying around the muzzle, but still healthy. Waddles was 12, quite old for a duck, and moving slowly but still with them. Puddle was 7, middle-aged and calm. They watched the three of them walk down to the dock together. Maple's pace matched to Waddles' slower waddle. They sat at the end of the dock, the dog and the 2 ducks, watching the sun set over the lake. It was a mirror image of a scene they'd witnessed countless times before, with Bailey and Waddles, and now with Maple and the two ducks. Do you think they know how special they are? Jake asked. He was home for a Thanksgiving break from graduate school. I don't think they think they're special, Mrs. Henderson said. I think they just think they're family, and that's what makes it special. I'm going to tell my kids about this, Emma said. She was engaged now, planning a wedding for next summer. About Bailey and Waddles, about Maple and Puddles, about how our family learned that love doesn't have to make sense. It just has to be real. Mr. Henderson put his arms around his family. We've been blessed, he said simply. And they all knew it was true Dodd as darkness fell and the stars came out. They called the animals inside. Maple stood up stiffly, shook herself, and started walking back up the dock. Waddles and Puddle waddled behind her. The three of them came up to the deck together, and the family held the door open for them. Inside, Maple went to her bed in the living room and lay down with a contented sigh. Waddles and Puddle climbed onto their beds next to Maple, tucking their heads under their wings. Within minutes, all three of them were asleep. The Hendersons sat in the living room for a while, just watching them sleep, not wanting the evening to end. These moments were precious, they knew. Time was always moving, animals aged, life changed. But in this moment, everything was peaceful and perfect. That night, Mrs. Henderson wrote in her blog, 12 years ago, Bailey found a duckling in distress and saved its life. Neither of them could have known that this single act of compassion would change our family forever. Bailey taught us about love without boundaries. Waddles taught us about resilience and loyalty. Together, they showed us that the most meaningful relationships often come from the most unexpected places. Now Maple carries on Bailey's legacy, and Waddles continues to teach us new things every day. We don't know how much longer we'll have with any of them, but we know that every day we do have is a gift. Tonight, as I watch our dog and our two ducks sleeping peacefully together in our living room, I'm overwhelmed with gratitude. Gratitude for Bailey, who started it all. Gratitude for Waddles, who chose us as her family. Gratitude for Puddle, who reminds us that love can be passed down through generations. And gratitude for Maple, who proves that Bailey's spirit of kindness lives on. If you're reading this, I hope you'll remember that kindness matters, that compassion matters, that taking the time to help a creature in need matters. You never know what might grow from a single act of love. The blog post was shared thousands of times. People commented from all over the world, sharing their own stories, thanking the Hendersons for reminding them of what's important, promising to be kinder to the animals in their lives. But in the Henderson house, the family turned off the lights and went to bed, leaving Maple, Waddles, and Puddle sleeping peacefully in the living room. Just another ordinary evening in an extraordinary life built on love, loyalty, and the enduring friendship between a dog and a duck. Years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as they always do. Waddles lived to be 15 years old, which is remarkably old for a mallard duck. She remained active and engaged until close to the end, still swimming almost daily, still preening Maple's ears, still teaching by example. When she passed away peacefully one spring morning, with Puddle and Maple beside her, the family grieved deeply. They buried her next to Bailey under the tree, and Maple and Puddle both stood vigil at her grave. Just as Waddles had done for Bailey years before, Puddle lived another 5 years after her mother passed, making it to 12 herself. She was more independent than Waddles had ever been, spending more time with wild ducks, but she always came home to the Hendersons, always slept in the house, always greeted Maple with affectionate quacks. When Puddle's time came, they buried her on the other side of Bailey's grave, so he was flanked by his duck and her daughter, together even in death. Maple lived to be 13, a good long life for a golden retriever. She remained gentle and kind until the end, never losing the lessons she'd learned from Waddles. When it was time to say goodbye to her, the family held her and told her she was a good girl, the best girl, and that she would see Bailey and Waddles and Puddle again. Wherever good dogs and ducks go when they leave this world, Emma's children grew up hearing the stories. She'd take them to the graves under the tree, tell them about great dog Bailey and the ducks he loved. She'd show them the pictures and videos, let them read the children's book their grandmother had written. They'd watch the documentary, marveling at these animals they'd never met but felt like they knew. One of Emma's daughters asked to get a golden retriever puppy and some ducks when she was older. Emma smiled and said, "We'll see. But remember, honey, what made Bailey and Waddles special wasn't just that they were a dog and a duck living together. It was the love they had for each other, the way they took care of each other. That's what we should try to create in our lives, no matter what animals we have." The Henderson house still sits by the lake. A new golden retriever lives there now, a male named River, and yes, there are ducks again too, though none quite like Waddles. The family learned they have a gift for caring for injured or orphaned waterfowl, and they've rehabilitated and released dozens over the years. A few have chosen to stay, and River is kind to all of them, though none have quite bonded with him the way Waddles bonded with Bailey, but that's okay. Bailey and Waddles were once in a lifetime. Their friendship was special, unique, miraculous even. It changed a family, touched thousands of people around the world, and left a legacy of love that continues to ripple outward. On summer evenings, you can still see a golden retriever sitting on the dock, looking out over the water with ducks swimming nearby. The names have changed, but the spirit remains the same. The spirit of kindness, of unexpected friendship, of love that transcends all boundaries. And sometimes, when the light is just right and the evening is peaceful, you could swear you see them all there together. Bailey and Waddles, Maple and Puddle, all the animals who have been loved and cared for in this special place by this special family. A reminder that love never really ends. It just transforms, continues, grows into something new while honoring what came before. The children's book Mrs. Henderson wrote is still in print, still being read to kids at bedtime, still making children cry and then smile. The documentary still gets shown in schools. The blog is archived online, a testament to years of daily life with these remarkable animals. And the story, the true story of a dog who saved a duckling and became her best friend, continues to inspire people to be kinder, to be more open, to look for connection in unexpected places, because that's what Bailey and Waddles really taught everyone who heard their story. That friendship doesn't require similarity. That family can be chosen. That love is bigger than we think it is. That a single act of compassion can change everything. That the boundaries we think exist between different kinds of creatures are often just in our minds. That at the end of the day, we're all just trying to survive, trying to find connection, trying to love and be loved at, and if a dog and a duck can figure that out, can build a friendship that lasts a lifetime and beyond, then surely we humans can do the same. We can reach across our differences. We can choose kindness. We can create families from the most unlikely combinations of souls. We can love without limits. That's the real gift Bailey and Waddles gave to the Hendersons and to everyone who heard their story. Not just a heartwarming tale of unlikely animal friends, but a blueprint for how to live. With openness, with compassion, with the understanding that love is the most important thing, and that it can show up anywhere, in any form, between any two creatures willing to open their hearts to each other. The lake still reflects the sunrise every morning. The dock still stretches out into the water. The tree still shades the 3 graves beneath it, and somewhere, in memory and spirit, a golden dog and a brown duck are still sitting together, Watching the water, best friends forever, teaching anyone who will listen about the transformative power of love. And that's the story. The story of Bailey and Waddles and Maple and Puddle, and all the love that flowed from one small act of rescue on one ordinary morning that turned out to be the beginning of something extraordinary. A story about how we're all connected, how kindness matters, how friendship can bloom in the most unexpected soil, and how love, real love, never dies but continues on, generation after generation, touching hearts and changing lives. One dog, one duck, one moment of compassion at a time.